Are you sick of having the same argument with someone over and over? While the topic might change, somehow you always end up covering the same ground and ending up in the same place, feeling hurt and a little defensive and wondering what's wrong with you or with them. If every fight feels like a rerun, this episode is for you. Because when the same argument keeps coming back time after time, it's not just about the surface issue. It is a pattern. And patterns can be changed. So let's talk about recurring arguments. Hello and welcome back to Let's Talk About Mental Health. I'm Jeremy Godwin and this show is all about practical mental health advice for real life. Now, if you often find yourself stuck in the same argument over and over again with someone you know, especially someone close to you, something needs to change. And that begins with how you approach the issue. Most of us don't think, I can't wait to have the same row 400 times. And yet, that's often what happens. We end up going round in circles about the same things to the point where it feels like you're stuck on the world's worst merry-go-round. Whether it's an argument with family members, or your partner if you're attached, or maybe even someone you work with, repeating the same types of fights over and over is absolutely exhausting. It chips away at your sense of connection, at your self-confidence, and at your mental health. You probably start dreading talking about certain topics. You find yourself walking on eggshells or bracing for the next blow-up. Or maybe you're the one who explodes and then feels awful afterwards. Either way, it's draining, especially with everything else going on in your life. Now, underneath most recurring arguments is usually something much bigger. Feeling unheard, feeling taken for granted, feeling unsafe, or feeling like nothing ever actually changes. And today, we're going to talk about how to get to the heart of what's actually going on, so you can finally stop the ride and get off that merry-go-round. If you've listened to my recent episodes on breaking patterns and on healthy conflict, you'll know that I talk a lot about the fact that patterns don't lie, and how conflict is actually supposed to move things forward, not just blow everything up. I want you to think of this episode as the next layer down. So we're zooming in on those recurring arguments that never quite get resolved. Because when the same issue or the same feeling keeps showing up in your fights, that's a very clear sign that something needs to change. Why? Because nothing changes if nothing changes. So let's talk about what are recurring arguments. When I say we keep on having the same fight, I'm not talking about a bit of deja vu over whose turn it is to put the bins out, or who messages who first. I'm talking about a recurring pattern of conflict in a relationship, where the details might change, but the emotional script is basically identical every time. So, you know how it goes. Someone feels ignored or criticized. Someone gets defensive or they shut down. Maybe there are a few familiar phrases that often come out. And then eventually you end up in the same place that you always do, feeling upset, exhausted, and no closer to actually fixing anything. And then you basically repeat the same thing the next time you fight, and the next, and the next. These are not just random arguments. They're cycles. And cycles have a structure. There's usually a trigger. There are early warning signs, and then there's the part where both of you slide into your usual roles without even thinking. So maybe you're the one who goes into lecture mode like I do. Maybe you're the one who apologizes just to make it stop, even though nothing changes. Maybe you both go silent and pretend everything is fine until your next blow up. Maybe you just both blow up at each other. Whatever your version is, it tends to follow a pretty predictable shape once you zoom out a bit. In real life, all of this might look like arguments that often circle back to the same themes. Things like feeling that the other person doesn't pull their weight, or that they don't listen, or that they don't prioritize you, or they don't follow through. It might be rows about spending or time or communication, but underneath, it's often the same core feeling flaring up again and again. Feeling unimportant, feeling controlled, feeling taken for granted, feeling like you're always the one who has to give in. These types of repeated arguments can tip you over the edge emotionally. It's not just one bad conversation. It's the sense that nothing ever actually shifts. You start to dread certain topics or certain times of day. You might find yourself editing what you say to avoid setting them off, or bracing every time they walk into the room in a certain mood. I mean, that's not just annoying, it's draining. These recurring fights are usually pointing to deeper stuff that hasn't been named or dealt with properly. We're talking about things like unclear boundaries, mismatched expectations, or past hurts that were just brushed aside instead of being repaired. Maybe whenever you raise an issue, the other person minimizes it or just turns it back on you. Maybe you both thought you'd moved on from an old breach of trust, but it keeps resurfacing in disguised form. Or maybe you've done the classic, well, let's never talk about that again thing, and then been shocked and surprised when that doesn't just magically disappear. Who knew? So when we talk about we keep on having the same fight, what we're really talking about is a few things at once. It's repeating emotional loops between two people, unspoken needs and boundaries that just keep on getting nudged but never fully addressed, and autopilot conflict styles, the ways that you both tend to react when you feel hurt or scared or disappointed or disrespected. None of that makes you a bad person, and none of that means that the relationship is automatically doomed. It just means that there is a pattern running the show. The key piece I want you to hold in mind as we're discussing this stuff today is this: recurring arguments are information. They're feedback. They're not a sign that you're too much or that you're terrible at relationships. They're simply a sign that something deeper needs your attention. Now, once you can see that, you can start to approach these fights very differently, not as random explosions that you just go along with, but as predictable patterns that you can choose to understand, interrupt, and slowly change. Okay, so before we talk about how to do that, let's talk about why repeating arguments affect your mental well-being. So there's some background stuff from a mental health perspective that we really need to consider in this conversation. First, your brain doesn't treat these recurring fights as being just neutral events. So if your closest relationships feel unsafe or volatile, your nervous system will start treating them like a threat. You might notice yourself getting jumpy or overreacting to tiny things, or maybe overthinking every message or replaying arguments in your head afterwards. That's what chronic emotional tension does. It keeps you on alert, which makes you even more reactive next time. And suddenly, the pattern has you instead of you having the pattern. Internally, repeating fights will mess with your sense of safety and self. So if you keep having the same argument about, let's say, never being listened to or not feeling like you're being considered, it can start to confirm your worst fears about yourself. Your brain starts thinking stuff like, maybe I am too needy. Maybe my feelings really don't matter. Maybe this is all my fault. Over time, that eats away at your self-worth, and you might end up lowering your standards, or you might stop speaking up altogether just to avoid yet another argument. Or you could swing around the other way and come back swinging because you're so tired of feeling unheard that you go from 0 to 100 just to get a reaction. There's also the relational impact. Recurring arguments damage relationships. They quietly dissolve trust and they eat away at the goodwill that you have towards one another. If every attempt to raise an issue turns into an argument or a brouhaha, you will start to believe that nothing ever changes, or you'll feel like, well, they never listened to me. On the other hand, if they feel often criticized or ambushed, then maybe they might start to see you as being the source of the problem rather than being someone who is trying to fix something. Whatever happens, the relationship stops feeling like you're working together as a team, and it starts becoming more like a tug of war, where each of you is bracing for the next pull. Better relationships, healthier relationships, are not built on never disagreeing. They're built on being able to disagree without destroying each other. And that's something I discussed recently in episode 309 about healthier conflict. Recurring arguments teach both of you that conflict means pain, not progress. Instead of it being, we can talk about difficult things and grow closer as a result, the lesson that your brain takes is, if we talk about this, things will get worse. That belief is completely lethal for healthy connection. Over time, you end up either avoiding the important conversations or you keep having them badly. And both options keep you stuck. But the fact is that if you keep having the same argument and doing nothing differently, it means that you are part of the pattern. This is not about blame, and it doesn't mean that the other person is off the hook. And it doesn't mean that you deserve to be treated badly. What it does mean is that you are responsible for your choices and your responses. And you have to recognize that also your silence, all of that stuff, what you choose to do, what you choose not to do, what you do say, what you don't say, it all feeds the loop. You cannot control what they do, but you sure as hell can control whether or not you keep on showing up in the same way. Now, while we're talking about this stuff, let's acknowledge that there's also a shame piece here that just doesn't get talked about enough. So when you find yourself in yet another round of the same fight with someone, it can be really easy to start thinking, what's wrong with me that I'm still here? Or why can't I sort this stuff out? Now, shame thrives in that space. It loves it. It tells you that you need to hide or to pretend that it's fine or to minimize your feelings or theirs. But shame also keeps you locked in the pattern because you don't want to admit, even to yourself, that something deeper needs to change. It feels easier to just blame the topic, well, it's just about the bins, than to admit to yourself, actually, I feel unimportant in this relationship. Let me give you a couple of really important things that I want you to bear in mind as we continue this conversation today. First, recurring arguments are not random. They're a pattern. And patterns are information. And second, if every fight ends the same way, the issue isn't just what you're arguing about, it's how you're doing it together. So let's be real here. All of this is the emotional equivalent of watching the same terrible sequel over and over again and still being surprised by how bad it is. At some point, you have to stop blaming the film and ask yourself why you keep pressing play. The good news, because there has to be some, the good news is that once you understand all of this, you can start to use these arguments as a guide instead of just seeing them as proof that your relationship is a hot mess. They're pointing to specific needs, to boundaries and hurts that require attention if you want this relationship to be healthier. They're highlighting where communication keeps going off the rails. They are showing you exactly where the work is needed. And we're going to talk about how to do the work right after this quick break. And welcome back. So now let's talk about how to manage recurring arguments. I'm going to share some quick things that you can do this week and then some bigger, longer-term changes for you to work on. So first, and this is absolutely essential, do a safety check. Start by checking in with yourself honestly and asking, is there any fear, control, or belittling in these arguments? If the answer is yes, your priority is your safety and support, not just learning to communicate better. That might mean talking to someone you trust or a professional, looking at support options, or thinking through what you need in order to feel safer. You deserve basic respect in every conversation, whether it's at home or at work, and you should not put up with crap. That is absolutely, categorically not up for debate. Next, name the loop. I want you to describe your recurring argument in one simple sentence. So something like, we usually end up fighting about money and it generally ends with me apologizing and nothing changing. Or maybe you could describe it as, we usually argue when I bring up plans and it ends with both of us sulking. It doesn't have to be a clever description, it just has to be honest. Getting it out of your head and onto paper turns this from some sort of vague, awful feeling into something tangible that you can actually see. And once you can see it, you can work with it instead of just feeling like you're being dragged along for the ride. Next, change how you respond. Over the next couple of weeks, I want you to practice one tiny interrupt whenever the usual argument starts to get going. So when you feel that familiar, oh, here we go again feeling, take 3 slow breaths before you answer, and I want you to deliberately lower your voice by 1 notch. That's it. What you're doing here is you're giving your nervous system a moment to settle so that you don't just jump straight into your automatic reaction. In that small pause, it's a couple of seconds, you have more choice about what happens next. So then when things are calm, have one conversation with the other person about the pattern itself, not about the last incident. So you might simply say to them, I don't want us to keep having the same argument. I'd really like us to talk about how we argue, not just what we argue about. Keep it short and focused, right? So you're naming the loop here and inviting them to look at it with you instead of reigniting last week's drama about the missed deadline or the messy kitchen. If the relationship feels basically safe and they're open to it, this is also where you might agree on a simple pause and reset rule, like choosing a phrase that one of you can say when things are getting too heated. All right, so now let's talk through some longer-term changes to work on over the next few months and beyond. These are more effort, but they have much bigger outcome and are definitely going to help you to make significant changes in this space. First, clarify your boundaries and non-negotiables. Over time, one of the most powerful things you can do is to get really clear about what is and isn't okay for you in arguments, because often we don't actually stop and think about these things. So doing that starts with you on your own. Think about tone, language, how long you're willing to stay in a circular conversation. What's off limits for you and what repair needs to look and feel like afterwards. You might write down things like no name calling, or if voices are raised, we both need to circle back and repair when we're calm. You don't have to sit the other person down with a big speech straight away, but at least having this stuff clear in your own mind protects your self-respect. From there, if the relationship is basically safe and both of you are willing, you can gradually move towards a shared sense of how we do conflict, right? So talking through things like having one issue addressed at a time, no threats, we take breaks when we need to, and we always come back to repair rather than just pretending that it never happened. That's the whole building better relationships piece in action. The goal is not to never disagree, because that's just not realistic. It's about disagreeing in ways that don't destroy you or the relationship. And if you find that the same harmful patterns keep happening even as you try to make these shifts, or if you feel scared or completely stuck, that might be a sign that it's time for outside support. A good counselor or therapist, either individually or together, won't somehow magically fix you, but they can help you to see the loop more clearly and practice new ways of responding so that you're not carrying it all on your own. All right, next, work on your emotional regulation outside the arguments. This one is about looking after your nervous system in small and realistic ways so that you can learn how to react differently in a fight. Now, that might be something like taking a 10-minute walk most days, having a short journaling session at night to be able to channel those emotions out, doing a couple of minutes of gentle breathing before bed, or scheduling a weekly "how am I actually feeling" moment or session with yourself. None of these things are particularly fancy or difficult, but what they do is that they teach your body that it's allowed to come out of high alert mode. Over time, that makes a massive difference. When the familiar argument starts to flicker, it means that you're more able to notice what's happening and say to yourself, okay, I'm getting activated, and then choose to do something different instead of just what you normally default to. Instead of going from calm to shouting in 0.3 seconds flat, this is how you protect your mental health. And it's how you show up differently in your relationships. Not by making one big dramatic breakthrough, but with small, repeated acts of care for yourself that give you more capacity in the hard moments. So, those are the tips. All the tips are listed in the transcript. It's linked in the description, or you can find it on my website at ltamh.com/episodes. So here's what I want you to take away from this episode. If you keep having the same argument, it's because there's a pattern running the show. And patterns can be understood, interrupted, and changed when you're willing to actually look at them and do a few small things differently. So, what's one small thing you can do differently next time that a recurring argument starts? Because when you boil it all down, recurring arguments are patterns, and once you can see the pattern, you can start changing how you show up in it. Each week, I like to finish up by sharing a quote about the topic, and I encourage you to take a few moments to really reflect on it and consider what it means to you. This week's quote is generally attributed to Aesop, and it is, "Most arguments are useless." Let me repeat that. Most arguments are useless. All right, that's it for this week. If you'd like to support the show, my Patreon gets you early ad-free episodes and extras. It's linked below. Thank you very much for joining me today. Look after yourself and make a conscious effort to share positivity and kindness out into the world, because you get back what you put out. Take care and talk to you next time. Join me next week to talk about feeling like you have no idea what you're doing. Plus, check out my episode on healthy conflict next. It's linked in the description. And make sure you follow or subscribe to never miss an episode. Let's Talk About Mental Health is an independent program. Discover more at ltamh.com.